Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the Gospel of John, chapter 10. Now, as I said, chapter 9 and chapter 10 really should be one chapter. I say this all the time. Chapter headings and verses are not inspired. And though they serve a purpose for referencing, in other words, reference points, instead of, opening the Bible and then searching through, and they really help. I know, like, for example, if I had to search for a scripture, and as I'm doing, this broadcast here, I'm eating up time. So if I know the verse, I can go straight to it. So that's a good purpose. Other than that, the problems is we read them as if they are breaking up the thought, which they never did. In other words, the original writings were in narrative form, so you read the story. So here's the thing. I'm not saying get rid of them. Just when you read, try to read without breaking the thought. All right. That said, chapters 9 and chapters 10 should be one because the story is the same. It starts off with Jesus healing a man that was born blind. And up until that time, there was never a record of anyone being healed of a person that is born blind. And I'm not sure that if there's any record of anybody since that time being healed when they were born blind. It's not to say that it can't happen. One of the things about, and again, I'm gonna do a sidebar quick right here. One of the things about when we address the issues of why we don't see miracles like we saw in Jesus' day or in the book of Acts, is one, because of the purpose. In other words, the purpose of the church is for teaching, instruction, training, building up for the work of the ministries. That's really why we don't see the miracles that we saw in Acts. In Acts, they were proclaiming the gospel, and God was proclaiming the gospel by signs and wonders. That said, it doesn't mean that signs and wonders doesn't happen today, and as God sees fit. And sometimes, remember, we don't always see. Now, here's a good example. We're reading now where this man gets healed. Keep this in mind. This man got healed in Jerusalem. 99.9% of the world never saw that miracle, right? Because they wasn't there. And the only reason why we know about the miracle is because of the inspired writings. So therefore, now we know about them, and we know about it because the focus was there. Now, there were Philip, who is recorded in the 8th chapter. We see a kind of a miraculous thing happen, but we don't see all of the travels that he did. Now, he performed miracles to the Samaritans. And then he baptized an Ethiopian. By the way, that Ethiopian goes back to Ethiopia. We don't really hear any stories about what happened to that Ethiopian. In other words, what did he do? We can assume that he took the gospel, but we just don't know because, again, that wasn't the focus of the gospel narratives. But anyway, Jesus heals this man, and on the Sabbath day, which the Pharisees took issue with, not the fact that the man was healed, but that he was healed on the Sabbath day. And so they're just going back and forth. And one of the most fascinating things about chapter 9 was that no matter how the Pharisees tried to discredit Jesus, no matter how they tried to turn the man away from Jesus, again, he's like, I was blind and now I could see. So now that's spilling over now to another discussion, okay, that I'm going to pick up with right now. Here we go. in John. Let's go back to, we're at chapter 10. But I want to go back and pick it up where verse 37. Now, in the back and forth, the Pharisees failed to get the blind man to renounce Jesus. They throw him out. So verse 37, Jesus answered, let's go back. Verse 35, when Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, he found him and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? Now that's interesting because he believed. He just didn't know exactly who Jesus was. But because of the miracle, he says, yeah, I believe. He says, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Now what's interesting is that, remember, this man would have, even though he didn't know that Jesus himself was the Messiah, he was going to say, point him out, and I believe based upon what you said. So here's a good example of the gospel being presented in signs and wonders. Verse 37, Jesus answered, you have seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. I believe, Lord. Now notice that he believed. So at this point, he was believing a man, not necessarily the Messiah, but he was believing the man who had performed miracles and said, I believe whatever you say. I believe, he said, and worship him. And Jesus said, I came into the world for judgment in order to that those that do not see will see. And those who do see will become blind. Now, if you were to, this last statement, in other words, Jesus brings the light, right? But let's say, for example, I come in, I see the light, but I'm rejecting the light, and now I'm in darkness. Now you can hear my voice, but I got the camera covered up. So what happens? If I reject the light, what am I in? I'm in darkness. Okay? I'm in darkness. And that's what happened with people, the hardness of their hearts. He says, now watch. So notice the Pharisees respond. Verse 20. So the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and asked him, we aren't blind too, are we? Well, why are you asking? Pharisee, right? He says, if you were blind, Jesus told them, you would not have sinned. But now you say, we see. So your sins remain. In other words, you see, but yet you are blind. You see, but yet you are rejecting the truth. Now, verse 10. So here's a good example. When I said verse 10 shouldn't be here. And notice how, we're so used to breaking up the thought. Jesus is continuing here. There shouldn't be any break, but I digress. I assure you, this is now chapter 10, verse 1. I assure you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the door but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. Now let me stop because I'm going to get to a verse later on that has been so misused. So let's kind of go back and establish, who is Jesus talking to? Well, right now he's talking to the Pharisees who asked him the question. We're not blind, are we? So remember, he's talking to Pharisees. So now he says again, if you don't enter in by the sheep, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the door but climbs up some other way is a thief and a robber. Now, why would Jesus apply this to the Pharisees? Because they were thieves and robbers. One, remember, God did not set the Pharisees in position of power and authority. The Romans did. And that's why you're a thief and you are a robber. Verse 2. The one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all of his own outside, he goes ahead of them. And the sheep follow him because they recognize his voice. They will never follow a stranger Instead, they will run away from him because they don't recognize the voice of a stranger. Now, Jesus gave this illustration, but they did not understand what he was telling them. If you remember back in chapter 6, Jesus made a statement. Oh, Jesus made a statement. Jesus made a statement that no one can come to the Father unless it was granted to him from the Father. Notice what Jesus is saying here, that they will not follow the voice of a stranger. Now remember, he is speaking this to the Pharisees who asked him, are we blind? Verse 7, so Jesus said again, I assure you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. Now, again, this is just to the Pharisees, the leaders whom the Romans set up are thieves and robbers. But keep this in mind when he uses the phrase here, thieves and robbers, keep in mind who he's referring to. He says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and out and find pasture. Now look at verse 10. A thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. Now let's stop because I have to address the completely misuse of this verse. And so he says, now a lot of people read this and they will go see the thief comes to steal and kill. Got a little flicker there. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. So people use this verse to say it's the devil. So then how they apply this is the devil comes to steal, kill, and to destroy. So when bad things happen to you, it's the devil stealing from you, your life, right? Or he's stealing. He is to steal, to kill, or to destroy your life. So that, and then the contrast that Jesus comes that you may have life and have it more abundant, have an abundance. So then the promise is that Jesus is going to give you an abundant life. So the problem here is this is not what Jesus is promising. And there's no contrast here. In fact, the devil is not even mentioned here. Again, remember, he's already defined who the thief is. The thief are those who have come into the sheep as fake shepherds trying to lead the flock. Jesus is contrasting. You are thieves and robbers. I am the true shepherd. Look at verse 11. I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired man, since he is not the shepherd, doesn't own the sheep, leaves them, and runs away when he sees the wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happened because he is a hired man and doesn't care about the sheep. Now, this here, Jesus gives us, he's from the beginning, he has given us the keys. He has given us truth. And for some reason, we kind of ignore this. In the church today, in the congregation, God's people, there are hirelings, and they're quite obvious. We just don't want to acknowledge. And it's sad because of they're just they're so plentiful. Now, how can you tell? One of the most obvious is they're begging, pleading, manipulating money, you to give money, right? That's one of the obvious, that they're hirelings. And when you look at let's put it like this, when you look at Christendom, okay, Christendom, and you'll see how in Christendom, man, if I'm a shrewd person, if I'm a hireling, well, the church, especially in America, is one of the best gigs, because if I amass a following, people are going to support my lifestyle. Not only that, but make me wealthy. Now, a lot of people don't realize that there are pastors that, you know, you look at their hirelings because they do not feed the flock. See, in this case, Jesus here is saying they don't protect the flock. So let's look at a lot of the churches, and you look at the hirelings, and you look at a lot of the wolves that are over. We could go to the largest denomination and how they protected pedophiles. We could look at other, we could look at other big famous ministers whose lives are abhorrent, the sinful life, but they get up. You know, let me use this because there was a TV show that came out a few years ago called Greenleaf, and when I saw some of the shows, I said that my first reaction was, they are they they are making fun of the church, and here is the sad truth about that. That what they were showing on this television show, it was about a church. It's about a big mega church, and then all of the scandals in the mega church. But here was the problem. Here's the problem. It's true. Not one single lie. As the old Dragnet show used to say, that the names have been changed to protect the innocent, or the not so innocent. But it's literally true. I mean, we could just go on and on and on, and we just kind of turn can we just turn a deaf ear to it? But see, here's the thing. So you can always tell a hireling because he's in it for the money, or they are in it for the money. And they may learn how to deliver sermons and stuff, but they'll come in, they're pastors, big mega pastors. They're not even present during the week. They may come in, do their sermon because that's the money Sunday to get the money. Then they often make other money. See, when they travel, this is the big thing. When they travel, and that's the itinerant circle. So they get invited to conferences and churches and stuff. They get paid. And watch this. Not only do they get paid, but they command, depending on how popular you are, they get paid hefty salaries. I remember hearing a story, this is in the 90s, of a well-known pastor who came to a well-known church in the area that I live in. And they said that this pastor commanded $60,000. Think about that. $60,000. And that's, by the way, that's just to get him on the plane to come here. $60,000. And then he called back, as the story goes, he wanted the offerings. Hireling. See, hireling. Hireling. So, I would be in churches where they wanted to bring in other churches, and the whole standard thing is how much money you're going to pay them. You settled that up front. I even knew of a pastor that he wanted some of the most famous ministers to come to his church, and so he had a nice strategy. He would wine and dine some of his friends so they can go back and they could tell this pastor. I mean, when I say wine and dine, put them up in the best hotels, have exclusive limousines and first class and all that. When I say wine and dine them, and then those ministers would go back and they would go, oh my, that pastor man in that city, you need to go and check that out, and he would achieve his goal. And they didn't mind paying these hefty salaries. They call them honorariums. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.